I see you. Do you remember hearing or reading the Hopi Elders' prophecy from June 2000? Some of you may remember how it felt to approach the new millennium with so many forecasts of doom. That time, like the time 5 years ago when a world pandemic was announced, like the times we are in now, brought up all the things: sorrow, uncertainty, anxiety, overwhelm, fear, and now plus now so much anger and outrage over the attempted authoritarian takeover of our country. It seems impossible to know what to do next. Where do we turn for guidance, for support, for solace? Well, back in 2000, the Hopi elders encouraged us, in a time when the river was moving very fast, to let go of fear and to embrace the change by becoming active participants in shaping a world based in compassion and unity. They said we should not look outside of ourselves, but rather ask if we're in right relation, if we know where our water is, if we know our garden. Create your community and be good to each other, they said. And here's the part that challenged me then, even as it challenges me now. They said, know, that is trust. Know the river has its destination. Let go of the shore, push off into the middle of the river. The middle of a fast-moving river. You know that feeling, I think, standing on the edge of something scary, both daring to jump in and wanting to run away. Neither option very attractive. But the elders tell us to jump. And when you do, they suggest looking to see who is in there with you, because they say the time of the lone wolf is over, and so gather yourselves. Gather in hope, compassion, and strength. And so, standing on the banks, we see this swiftly moving river, but we can also see, if we choose to trust, that there is a community of folks right there in it with us. It sucks to be in the middle of the river, and it's better with people around us. Now, what is also true that many, if not all of us, have had experiences that have led us to be leery of community. Expectations, rules, disagreements, conflicts, betrayals, exclusion, racism, homophobia, disappointment. Community is the personification of interpersonal dynamics writ large, making community easy to walk away from, or at best, easy to hold at a distance. And yet, we are a lonely population, isolated, siloed. U.S. Surgeon General Dr. Vivek Murthy has called it an epidemic of loneliness, which led to his office in 2023 publishing a full report on the healing effects of social connection and community. That report, speaking of trends in social connection, said that since the 1970s, participation in religious communities has declined. In 2020, only 47% of Americans said they belonged to a church or synagogue or mosque, and this is down from 70% in 1999. Religious community or faith-based groups have been proven to serve as communities of support, a place that can provide meaning and purpose, create a sense of belonging. Without these things, our health is literally compromised, the report says. And it's a fascinating read, so let me know if you'd like the link. It's pretty easy to find if you Google it. Showing up in community, wherever you can find or create it, is one of the bravest things we can do right now. Human beings need connection. This is how Brene Brown puts it. We are psychologically, emotionally, cognitively, and spiritually hardwired for connection, love, and belonging. These are irreducible needs of all people. It's what gives purpose and meaning to our lives. The absence of love, belonging, connection always leads to suffering." End quote. So here we are, First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, a community of humanists. What do we have to offer in this epidemic of loneliness as we all stand on the banks of a swiftly moving river? Just this week, Fish Stark, who's the executive director of the American Humanist Association, wrote, "Humanists don't agree on everything, but one thing we've always known, encoded into the DNA of our shared philosophy, is that nothing else matters if we don't look out for each other." Nothing else matters if we don't look out for each other. Emphasizing this point, Rabbi Sharon Bruce wrote in her book, The Amen Effect, the book that Phil read from earlier, "The remedy to loneliness is social connection. That's the only way out. To truly flourish, our hearts naturally yearn for deep, meaningful connections. According to Maimonides, the great Jewish medieval philosopher, the relationships that form the emotional heart of our lives are those of mutual concern and shared purpose." Unquote. She goes on to say that relationships of mutual concern are rooted in love and trust, and that relationships of shared purpose are rooted not only in a commitment to one another, but also to a shared dream that inspires a sense of belonging. So is this community one of mutual concern and shared purpose for you, or could it be? You know, it had become, over the past few decades, rather countercultural to seek out community. We have been in a time of the lone wolf, for sure, when personal gain and satisfaction have seemed to be of greater importance than service and the common good and, well, others. I don't know about you, but I sense in recent days that this is changing. More and more of us are reeling from what's happening around us and looking for ways to join with others in common purpose, looking for places where we can find that support and belonging. And yet we have got some work to do to be able to build or rebuild trust in community, or even in a belief that the experience of being in community can be a positive thing. You know, Brene Brown tells a story about her daughter Ellen and trust. Ellen's teacher kept a marble jar in the classroom, maybe not unlike this one. And when the kids were making great choices, she'd add marbles. And when they were not making great choices, the teacher took marbles out. And if the jar got filled up, there was a promise of a celebration for the class. Well, one day Ellen came home crying, saying that she'd told some friends about a really hard thing that had happened to her. And someone shared it with others, and soon everyone in the class knew what had happened, and they were pointing and laughing at her and calling her names. And the teacher kept saying, "I'm going to take marbles out, I'm going to take marbles out." And through her sobs, Ellen said to her mom, "I will never trust anyone again." Well, Brené's take on trust is that it's like that marble jar. When we share hard stories and are vulnerable with one another, that experience breeds more trust, and we fill up the marble jar. When we show up for one another, when we listen, when we sit with one another's pain, we add marbles. When we're able to ask for help, we add marbles. Trust is built in these very small moments. Very small moments when we have the opportunity to build trust, but we also have the opportunity to betray. Marbles in, marbles out. Brene Brown says she finds Charles Feldman's definition of trust the most beautiful for her. Trust is choosing to make something important to you vulnerable to the action of someone else. Trust is choosing to make something important to you vulnerable to the action of someone else. And from that, Brown created an acronym that is meant to help us remember what trust really is. She calls it braving. B is for boundaries, holding them and respecting them. R is for reliably doing what we say we will. A is for accountability and owning and apologizing for mistakes. V is for vault, which is to say what is shared we hold in confidence. I is for integrity in living one's values, and for non-judgment, knowing that all of us fall apart and struggle sometimes. And finally, G is for generosity, or maybe I would use the word grace, in assuming the most generous things we can about one another. So when we trust, we are braving connection with one another. And notice how many action verbs are part of that breakdown of the word braving. Trust is a practice that we must exercise through action. And when we experience these things in ourselves and in one another, we add marbles. And when we do not, we take marbles out of that collective jar. And it's like what Rabbi Bruce talks about in the Amen effect. She tells us that the word amen derives from the Hebrew word emunah, meaning belief or trust. And so to say amen, she says, is to affirm each other, or to say, I believe you, I see you. She defines amen as that very human longing for connection, and trust as something that piles up, like marbles, in small amounts and in consequential choices we make in small moments. Now, Brosa's perspective is one of community, while Brown's maybe is more skewed toward trusting one another individual to individual. So the rabbi's list of what builds trust is a little different from Brown's. The first, she says, is to show up, as you did this morning. You have to show up for the experience of community, and you've done that today, and for the opportunity to contribute to the power of community. Showing up, erring on the side of being present matters, because your presence is essential to building community and trust. Brous also says that what builds trust is coming alive. That is, to choose to live the life we have, to choose to do what is ours to do, as is familiar in words of benediction here, to choose what makes you come alive, because this is what the world needs. This is what the community needs. People who have come alive. And a community thrives when within it each person can fully express themselves and find their place of belonging. This adds marbles to the jar. Then Brous speaks of bearing withness. Withness. I think this is one of the most important things in religious community or in congregational humanism. Here we are at our best when we realize we don't have to save someone who's suffering. We just need to accompany them. We can't repair each other's broken hearts. We really just need to be there and to not look away. Now, there are 5 other trust-building things that Brous lists, but I'll leave it at that for now, in part because even as I read Brene Brown encouraging us to brave trust, and even as I read about the power of the Amen effect, my heart is a little hesitant. You know, I'm not sure I want to step off the banks and jump into that river. I've been hurt by community, by what's felt like betrayal. And even as I become increasingly convinced that our salvation lies in connection, I can be wary. And maybe you feel that too. So I ask again, why should anyone show up for community at First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis? What do we have to offer in this epidemic of loneliness, this sea of distrust, as we all stand on the banks of a swiftly moving river? How do we make this place worthy of the trust of all who would join us? Now, I suppose the simple answer is that we have to be willing to make choices in all of the small moments to do the things that add marbles to the jar. And we have to be willing at those times when we take marbles out of the jar to hang in there with one another, to listen, to heal, to forgive, to ask forgiveness, to bear witness. Frankly, if we can't do that, we're really not worthy of anyone's trust. Now, I believe First Unitarian Society aspires to be that place where we live joyfully and ethically in loving relationship with humanity and nature, where we aspire to support one another's journey toward meaning and connection in the here and now, where we aspire to live with integrity, to be reliable and accountable to one another, where we show up for building trustworthy community. And like so many other things, that's so much easier said than done. It can be really hard to put marbles back in the jar, and even harder to put it can be really hard to put marbles in the jar, and even harder to put the ones back that have been taken out. And this is the reality of life and community, I think. We are human, so human. And sometimes we do things that diminish our marble jar. And yet we can't let this be the thing we can't overcome or undo, especially in these times. Long ago, Hannah Arendt warned that terror can rule absolutely only over those who are isolated against each other. Therefore, one of the primary concerns of all tyrannical governments is to bring this isolation about, unquote. I say again, showing up for community over and over is one of the bravest things that we can do. It will be our salvation. There's no other way to get across the river. The only real liberation is collective liberation, and the only path to healing is one that's wide enough for all of us in community. And so I invite you to trust this, to lean into it, to give it a try. I see you. We are not alone. We are, each and every one, the ones we have been waiting for. Amen. It would be great